Well, hello to everybody. I hope you're doing well today. This is Ted Pattison coming to you from Tampa, Florida, where it's hot and steamy as always. Anyway, I've been working quite a bit with combined knowledge, and one of the things that we're going to be doing is teaching some Power BI courses this fall. I'm going to just kind of preview them quickly here. There's a Power BI Bootcamp and a Power BI Developer Bootcamp, and I'll talk a little bit more about those after the hour that we presented this. So what we want to talk about is Power BI and some of the new features in Power BI. So we're going to start with just a quick introduction to what the Power BI platform is, and along the way we'll also need to bring in Power BI Desktop, which is the fundamental tool which everybody uses when we create solutions and we push solutions out into a production environment. There's something brand new which is known as a Power BI app. So we're going to talk about apps and app workspaces and talk about how they have replaced the use of organizational content packs that were the proper way before app workspaces came about to push a solution out. And then at the very end, we're going to talk about a couple of developer opportunities. I'm not going to go into code or anything, but just talking about how far you can take Power BI out of the box, and when does it make sense to bring in a developer and basically customize some of the pieces that you're working with in a solution. Okay, well, let's go ahead and start with this thing which is called the Power BI service. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move over to the Power BI service here. And notice that I'm going to go ahead and sign in. Now, the Power BI service is a software as a service style application. So there's nothing that you need to install on your computer. You just basically need to have a license. Now, notice that, I'm logged in, under my account right here. And so here I have a workspace, and notice that I have a couple of reports and dashboards. Now, the first thing I want to show is that this user interface that you see here, where we have a navigation on the left. So notice that I can bring up a report. I can go and start, looking at the pages in my report. I can go to a data set. This navigation that you see right here is what we've been using for the last 2 years, but it's what we're now moving away from to a new user interface experience for navigation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to Settings. Under Settings, under Preview Features, you're going to see that there is a new navigation. Now, the new navigation is something that we're replacing the old navigation with. Let me go ahead and choose Apply. And once I do that, I'm just going to do a hard refresh. And so now what you're going to see is that the navigation doesn't go down the left-hand side, but instead, when you're in a workspace, you now have dashboards, reports. So the problem with the old navigation is that when you had 30 dashboards, they went down and took up the whole screen, and you had to scroll down very far to be able to get to reports and data sets. So now just the UI is going to be much better when you start having, lots of Power BI resources, which are basically dashboards, reports, and data sets. And the idea is that I can see a data set. I can basically get into the different settings. I can go look at the workbooks. I don't have any workbooks in here. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then also here, note that I have a report. I don't have a dashboard yet. Let's create our first dashboard. So if I open a report and I take one of these visuals, and notice that there's a little thumbtack up here. And so if I click on that, that's the command to pin a report visual to create a dashboard tile. So I'll call this my new dashboard. We'll go ahead and click OK. And so now that you've done that, let's use the navigation. Notice that now under dashboards, I can see this dashboard. I can open it up and I can start moving things around. Okay, now what you've seen here is this new user interface experience, and it's still kind of referred to as in preview, but any month now they're going to switch over, and that's going to be the permanent navigation. So if you're using Power BI, I'd say move over to the new navigation as soon as you can. And I'll make a couple comments along the way about the differences between the two. Now, one really big change that happened to Power BI in this quarter was basically the way that licensing is done. So let's talk about how we've done licensing before the big announcements that we had in May. So for the first couple years, Power BI had two licensing options. You can be a free user, so you have to have a license, you have to be signed up, you don't pay anything for it. And then there's also the pro license, which we pay $10 a month for. And if you are a Office 365 user and you have an E5 license, you automatically get Power BI Pro, as part of that licensing. Now, in the initial offering, we also say everything has been running inside of what we're going to refer to as a shared capacity. Now, we didn't really use the term shared capacity before until we've had this last set of announcements and something which is called Power BI Premium. So the big announcements around licensing that were made at the beginning of May this year were mainly to introduce something which is called Power BI Premium, which now gives us a licensing model that doesn't really license users directly. Instead, it licenses the hardware that we're using. So there's this notion of a dedicated capacity. Now, up to this point, we haven't had dedicated capacities. And what that means is that every single organization that's using Power BI is uploading things like their data sets into a shared space. So all other users basically, potentially could be inside there. And so Microsoft has had to do things such as limit how big your data sets when you upload them in a PBX project file can be. They're limited to 1 gigabyte. We're limited to refreshing only 8 times a day. But now what Microsoft has done with this dedicated capacity model is they're able to, inside of their data centers, basically declare that this set of hardware is committed exclusively to one organization. And once they do that, you're no longer running in a shared space. And so we refer to that as a dedicated capacity. And what Microsoft wants to do is charge for the capacity, not for the users. And one of the big things that this gets to that we haven't had before is that now Microsoft, has an attractive offer to companies where they're really large. And let's say that as far as dedicated report authors, we have 20. And then casual report readers, we have 5,000. So before this, it got to be really tricky because quite often your consumers all had to pay $10 a month. And lots of companies just did the math and it wasn't working out. So what Microsoft has figured out is if they can basically have companies pay for the capacity, and then whether a company can get 1,000 users or 10,000 users out of that, that's great. And if they get a capacity and they get 1,000 users and it works great, and then their user base grows to 5,000 and things are slowing down, they basically just need to, spend more on their dedicated capacity. Okay, so that's the big change that we have, is this idea of dedicated capacities. Now, you still have the Power BI free license. We still have the Power BI Pro license. But one of the other interesting things is that Power BI Premium makes it possible for developers to create applications with Power BI embedded and then to serve up Power BI reports to people that don't have Office 365 accounts or Power BI licenses, to non-licensed users. So Microsoft now is, trying to move Power BI, into a platform that can be used for commercial applications, something like Salesforce. Not Salesforce, but something like it. Someone has an application, someone has their own database of users, and they authenticate. So without any Office 365 accounts or any Power BI licenses, we still want to serve up reports to these users, and that's what Power BI Premium, gives me the ability to do. Okay, there's lots of flux going around. One thing that Microsoft did is when they first announced the price of their dedicated capacity, it was really for large companies, and the price came out at $6,000 a month as the entry barrier. And so there was about 2 weeks on different distribution lists that, lots of companies and Power BI developers, were making the comments that this is way too expensive. There's no way I can use this. So at the Microsoft Data Insights Summit conference last week, Microsoft came out with much more attractive SKUs, for companies that want to, basically have commerce style applications. So now the entry level is $625 per month. So multiply that by 12, and that's kind of your entry level to getting into, Power BI embedding to be able to target, users that don't have Power BI licenses. Okay, now let's go ahead and get into some conceptual understanding of, if we have Power BI, how do we go about authoring things inside there? So one thing that you can do as a solution author is that you can use the browser. And as for instance, let's say that I go back here and I'm just using the browser, and here I am, inside of my workspace right here. And so there's get data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I want to look at the files that I have, maybe on my machine, maybe the files that I have in OneDrive. And what I want to do is I want to import something, whether it's a CSV file or an Excel workbook with some data. In this case right here, it's going to be a Power BI desktop project. But the idea is that just using the browser, while I can't do advanced query work or data modeling, I can indeed import a data set. Once I import this data set, I can then start creating reports on top of that particular data set. And so, as we go through here and, start, drawing things out inside, you can see that, within the particular browser, you have full ability to import data, to design reports with the report designer, and if I wanted to create a dashboard, I can do that as well. Okay, so the first step is the browser. Now, if you're working with Power BI Desktop, you want to use the main tool, which is Power BI Desktop. Power BI Desktop is going to be a lot more powerful because it allows you to import data and to do some very powerful work with the query design. So when you need to clean up data, when you need to take data from a database that's in one schema and put it into a different schema that's better suited for analytics, Power BI Desktop, is going to give you, all those type of capabilities. Now, we also have Microsoft Excel. Now, with Microsoft Excel, I need to tell a little background story. Now, the current version of Power BI has been around for about 2 years. Before that, for a little over a year, Microsoft ran a preview of the first version of Power BI. Now, I'd like to think of this as the first pancake principle. The first pancake principle is that when you're cooking pancakes for your kids, the pan's never at the right temperature, so the first pancake never really works out. You always throw it away, and you give them basically the second pancake. So the first version of Power BI was called Power BI for Office 365, and it was the first pancake. It was thrown away. And the reason for that is that it had dependencies on Excel, and it had dependencies on SharePoint Online. Now, Microsoft hired this kind of a visionary fella from Silicon Valley named James Phillips, hired him away from the competition. He came in to lead the Power BI team, and right away he saw the first pancake problem. So what he decided was that if Power BI has a dependency on Excel, and then anytime we change Power BI, we have to do regression testing to make sure that the 50 million Excel users, aren't going to have something broken, that would not be very flexible. So Power BI was pretty much recreated from the ground up to remove any dependencies on Excel, to remove any dependencies on SharePoint Online, such that the Power BI team can now update the Power BI service and Power BI Desktop on a monthly basis without worrying about breaking things. Now, Microsoft Excel, while Power BI doesn't really have a dependency on it, does have a lot of neat integration points. So some of the things that you can do is you can take an Excel workbook that has data inside of it. Sometimes you have data in tables. Sometimes you have data in a data model. And you can either import that data and basically get it out of Excel and create a Power BI data set, or it's also possible for you to basically have a Excel workbook that you upload to something like OneDrive for Business, or you can upload it to SharePoint online, and then you can simply connect to it from Power BI, and your Excel workbook will just be shown through the Power BI user interface. So when you look back here and you look at Workspaces and you look at, what is inside of your workspace right here, notice that there is a Workbooks tab, if you have connected to any workbooks inside there. Okay. And then there's also the ability to create custom applications. So if you're a developer, that's another solution. Now, typically, if you want to get into Power BI and start creating solutions, your first job is to get really good at Power BI Desktop. Now, when you create solutions, the good news is that people can get to your reports and dashboards in any browser. So as you look at this browser-based experience, it works great with Chrome. It works great with Safari. It works great with IE. Going back to IE 9, it works, great with any modern browser. Okay. Now, in addition to providing access to the browser, they also thought out the fact that they wanted Power BI to be a first-class platform for delivering solutions to mobile devices. So from the beginning, Microsoft had planned to create native apps for Power BI that can be installed on the iPad, the iPhone, Android phone, and Windows 10 phone. So there's really great solutions inside there. And then also, if you are a developer and you're just creating a commercial application and you want to just basically do the work to embed Power BI reports, dashboards, and tiles in your application, that's available to you as well. Now, let's go to some of the central concepts in Power BI. So the first idea is we have this idea of a workspace, which is also known as a group. So as I go back here, notice that now we have workspaces. Now, just for a second to indulge you, if I go back to settings, and I go back to settings, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to go switch back to the old UI for a second. So I go ahead, switch back, and now I'm back in the old UI. And so notice that in the old UI, they call them group workspaces. And without really changing anything other than the UI, when you switch over to the new UI, they're called app workspaces, but they're the exact same thing. So I just wanted to show you that, workspaces have their names that are changing from group workspaces to app workspaces, but they're the same thing underneath. Okay, let's go ahead and change this back. Choose apply. Go ahead and get back to the new UI. Okay, so notice that now under workspaces, I can see the exact same things that I created before as group workspaces. Now, every user that has a Power BI license has a personal workspace that has the name My Workspace. Now, if you are a pro user, you are able to either create or at least enter an app workspace. So one of the big reasons we like app workspaces is that within your personal workspace, all that you can do is edit things by yourself. No one else can get in and edit anything in your personal workspace. So to have any type of team-based development, you need app workspaces. Now the app workspace and the personal workspace is a container. So no matter what workspace you're in, there is a collection of dashboards, of reports, of workbooks, and of data sets inside there. Okay, we're going to come back to app workspaces a little bit later and kind of talk more about, how we can use them. Now, in addition to the workspace, we have the resources. So we have things like dashboards, we have reports, and we have data sets. Now, the idea of the dashboard is it's a consolidated view into a report or a dashboard. As a for instance, so let's go back to look at some reports here. And so let's say that I don't have a dashboard for wingtip sales analysis yet, but let's say that we go in and now we want to create one. So we'll go ahead and we'll create a new dashboard, wingtip sales analysis. And as I do this, what you can see is that I can start taking and pinning these report visuals to basically create dashboard tiles. Now, as I move inside here, let's go back over to the dashboard I just created. Note that unlike a report, there is a grid system that these tiles automatically snap to. So one of the observations is that dashboards are much more tailored towards mobile devices. So there is going to be a better rendering experience. In fact, here, notice that I have something that's fairly wide inside here. Maybe, in addition to this, let's go back and create one more thing inside here. So if I go back to my workspace and we go back to this report inside here, and let me find another visual inside here, and we'll go ahead and pin that. And now that we've pinned that, we'll go back to our dashboard. And so let's say I take this and I kind of move it up here. Now there is a web view and a phone view. And the idea with dashboards is that when you render this on a mobile device, it's automatically going to stack what we have inside there. And that's what things are going to look like. But what we find is that some things don't work well on mobile devices. So you have the ability to have one of these not show when it's rendered on a mobile device, but only show when it's rendering on a different type of device. Okay, and notice that, you're also able to move things around here. But you'll find that some things look good on mobile devices. Other visuals are just too wide, to be able to work with that inside there. Okay, so let me go back to web view here. Now, let me get back to the slides. So the dashboard, we think of as kind of a high-level view into a report or data set, and it serves very well as the entry point into a custom solution when users are using mobile devices. Now, reports, on the other hand, can have a lot more detail. Also note that reports, let's go back to this report for a second, and if I go now back to this report and I drill into it, note that reports, can provide interaction, and that dashboards do not provide interaction. So there's differences between reports and dashboards that you should understand. Also realize if you're building a solution, you might just need a report with an underlying data set. You might have no need for a dashboard, so providing the dashboard is actually optional inside there. Now, at the very bottom, you have this notion of a data set. So a data set is basically just this abstraction, of a set of tables. And a simple data set, could have something such as, a single table with 3 rows and 10 columns. A data set could also, have 11 tables with relationships created between all the different tables and lots of data modeling facilities added on top, such as calculated columns and measures inside there. So data sets can be complex. Note that when you upload a data set from something like a CSV file, you can't change the data set in the browser. That's where you'd have to use Power BI Desktop for. Okay. So what we've just kind of seen is a dashboard, is really a collection of tiles. And quite often you create a report, and then from the report visuals, you create a dashboard full of tiles. And one of the things that you can see here is that if someone goes to a dashboard and clicks on a tile, and that tile was created from a report visual, the user is automatically redirected to that report and that page in a report. Let's go back here. Let's go back to, here I am, at the particular dashboard. Notice that, dashboards do provide interactive behavior. They just don't allow you to do interactive filtering or drill down. But if I now decide I want to take a bigger look at this, notice that if I click on this tile, I am redirected to the report and the page on the report where that tile came from. So the idea is when a user sees something, they can basically click to drill into the report, and that's where you provide the drill down capabilities inside there. Okay. Now, reports have pages, and there is a little tabbed navigation, at the very bottom. So if you create a report and it has multiple pages, the users can basically move from page to page inside there. Now, if you're report authoring through the browser, note that in order to modify a report, it's different than a dashboard. And let me show you what I mean. If I go to a dashboard, dashboards don't really have a read versus edit mode. They're kind of always in edit mode. And as you make changes, you don't have to explicitly save. They're kind of saved as you go. Now, when I move over to a report, things are going to be different because the report is initially in a read-only view mode. It's kind of in the mode that you're the report author. It's the mode that consumers are going to be looking at. But if I click on Edit Report, now I get into edit mode. Once I get into edit mode, I have things like the fields list. I have the visualizations list inside here. So for instance, I create a new page. Great. I now can add a new visual. For instance, we'll add a pie chart. And as we add the pie chart inside there, we'll look at customers. And maybe we'll look at something, such as customers' age group inside here, and we can kind of start seeing the breakdown of that. Okay, and then maybe I don't like pie charts. I've heard they're not cool to use anymore. So notice that we have different types of visuals, that we can, use to basically try the same data, and see how things work inside there. And hopefully we'll find one that makes the most sense. To be able to visualize our data and provide insights. Okay. Now, the built-in visuals are pretty extensive and they're pretty cutting edge. So I think what you'll find is that, the Power BI team is really kind of trying to have the most cutting edge visuals that are available out of the box. Microsoft with Power BI is in head-to-head competition with Tableau. So anytime something comes up in Tableau, you can bet it's on the radar within Microsoft, and they're going to try to, match or have something better, in the short term. The other neat thing about visualizations is that with the Power BI platform, they decided pretty early on that they wanted any developer to be able to create a custom visualization and be able to add it into the Power BI infrastructure fairly easily. So that's a huge advantage over Tableau, where all the visuals they have, have to be created by their own product team. Okay. Now, what you'll find is when you have different visuals, there's a fields pane, a format pane, and an analytics pane. Okay. So for instance, I go back over here, and you can see that there's these three panes right here that you can move back and forth between. And so let's say that now we want to split things out by age group. Okay, great. And now maybe we want to use a legend. So if I come back up here and I find something such as customer gender, and we go ahead and we add that into the legend. Okay, well that's great. I've got things inside here. Okay, but now I've added all the fields that this visual needs. So now let's go ahead and switch some colors. So we move over to the format pane. Maybe the first thing we like to do is to take the legend, and move it, over to the right-hand side over here. And maybe it's not big enough, so we'll make it bigger inside there. Okay, now that we've done that, maybe we don't like the colors. So notice that they allow me to come up here and use, very stereotyped colors, for the two different genders inside there. Okay, but you get the idea that, what do we have, inside of the format pane? Generally things that style the particular element. And note that every single visual, gets to decide, what custom properties are available inside. Okay. Now, let's say I switch this over, to something, like a line chart inside here. And maybe we'll go back here and we'll kind of switch the axis from age group. And we go grab something, such as a quarter inside there. So now we kind of have more, of a, how things grown over time inside here. Okay, great. And now we'll go to the last one, which is the analytics pane inside there. Now, notice that the analytics pane is where I can do things like create constant lines. For instance, if I wanted just to add a line, kind of show, where the million mark is, it's easy for you to add things, inside there, to basically, bring out, more points of comparison, to bring out more insights about your data. Okay, now notice that, look at this set of things that's available. Great, okay. Let's go back here to the fields list. Let's remove quarter, and let's go ahead and add things back in by the actual date. Now, once I add things in by the date, you can basically, see how we've gone across, and now that we're doing day-by-day comparisons, having this 1 million line probably isn't very good, so we'll go ahead and, maybe move that back to see which days are over, 10,000 or which days are over 20,000 inside there. Okay, but now, what we can see down here, is that we just have different ways to, bring out the data and provide, more insights about it. Okay. Now, when you're working with a report, remember that a report is tightly coupled to a single data set. And whether you go to an existing report that's already associated with a data set, or you create a new report, as in the case here, if I basically go and I take a look at my data sets, I can create a report from a data set. So for instance, let's create a data set from this one right here. And I'll call this one report 1. And what I want to do is I just want to make kind of a quick comment, about reports and data sets. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm going to save this report. And I'm going to just save this as report 1. Now back here, I look at reports. And what you can see is I just created report 1. If I come back here and I click on this one thing, which is the view related, you can see that this is based on the wingtip sales data set. Likewise, if I go to this other one right here, this other report, you're going to see that this one, is also, based on that data set. Let's go remove that data set. I'll go to wingtip sales, and I am going to delete it. And the reason I wanted to show that is once you delete that one data set, all the reports that were associated with the data set are also deleted. Now note that dashboards don't have the same tight coupling. So every report is based on a single data set. Yet a dashboard can have tiles for multiple reports and multiple data sets. So deleting a data set might delete reports. It will never delete a dashboard, but it could delete tiles from that dashboard. Okay. Now, next thing we're going to look at right here is creating solutions with Power BI Desktop. Now, this is a really big topic, so I need to kind of give a overview, a flyby. But the idea is that working with Power BI Desktop, you're going to be able to pull data out from anywhere that you can pull data from. If you have been able to extract data with any other Microsoft tool in the past, you will be able to extract data from the same source with Power BI Desktop. And the idea is not only do they allow you to extract data, but they give you very powerful query features so you can clean up the data and do all kinds of reshaping and transformation on the data. Once you've queried and pulled data in and you've built a base set of tables in your project's data set, you can then start using the data modeling features and the DAX programming language. Now note that with Power BI Desktop, one thing that catches people by surprise is that we use it to discover the data. We use it to basically do the ETL, the extract, transform, load. We use it to do data modeling. It's got a report designer, but Power BI Desktop doesn't touch dashboards. So dashboards always have to be created inside of the browser. Okay, now let me open up a particular project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my machine. I'm going to find a particular Power BI desktop project. Let's take this one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy it and give it a different name. So let's go ahead and I'll just kind of call this the Combined Knowledge Demo, the CK Demo. The PBIX file is the project file format for Power BI Desktop. And notice that within this one particular project, let me open it up, there's going to be the definition of data sources and queries, and those queries can be executed. We can download data, and that imported data is also stored in the PBIX file. Okay, so the idea is with Power BI Desktop, we learn to use this particular tool, and first thing we have is we have a set of data sources. So you can see that here I've already created some queries, but here's where we are pulling our data from, for those particular queries. If you actually look at the query window right here, you're going to find that when you're working with Power BI Desktop, you have the main window, and then you have the query window. So quite often you're going back and forth between these. You bring up the query window to import more data, and as you are importing the data, note that you can also do all kinds of operations to transform the data inside there. If you haven't seen Power BI Desktop and you've worked with something like Excel and Power Pivot, you're going to find that Power BI Desktop might be a little different at first, but it's much more modern, much more streamlined. So the way I like to think about it, when it comes to creating BI solutions that need to query, extract data, and do data modeling, you can use either Excel or you can use Power BI Desktop. The problem with Excel is that the Power Query tools and the Power Pivot tools are about 3%, and the other 97% of Excel is a bunch of baggage from 20 years worth of Microsoft throwing things in and not being able to remove them. So for people who have used Excel for 10 years and they know what they're doing, it's great. But for people who are starting out, I would argue that Power BI Desktop is going to be much more straight ahead just because it doesn't have all the noise that Excel does, and it has a much more updated set of features. So Power BI Desktop updates once a month. Excel doesn't update anywhere near that often. But the idea is that you're going to create some queries here. Now, as we get into these query tools, what you're going to see, let me go a couple slides, is that Power BI Desktop allows you to point to different data sources. And you're going to be able to extract the data. You're going to be able to then do transforms and load the data in. And what's really nice about that is as your data changes, you can rerun the same queries tomorrow. And when the data changes, the query doesn't change, but the results of running that query change. So the idea is we run queries and we refresh the data. Note that where we're going is as you're doing project work, you can refresh the data and it sits just on your desktop inside of your project. At the end, we're going to publish and we're going to push this data set up into the cloud, into the Power BI service, and then we are able to configure the data set to refresh itself right from the data sources, so Power BI Desktop doesn't have to be involved after you publish the project when you want to refresh data. Now, one of the things we don't have time to do is go into all the different tools, and so what you're going to be able to do is basically get work with Power BI Desktop and learn how to create queries inside there. And what you're going to see is that you can click, 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 and it will create applied steps inside of your query. If you get into more advanced usage, note that behind the scenes, here's the query editor tool. If I go to View and we go to the advanced editor, every single query in both Power Query and Excel and inside of Power BI Desktop is stored as a batch of code written in a programming language known as M, the letter M. Okay. Now, in addition to creating queries, we also do our data modeling in Power BI Desktop. So we do things such as let me go ahead and take this project, and we'll go ahead and we'll close and apply. And now that we're back here and we go to relationship view, you can see in a Power BI desktop project, that you're able to bring in data from lots of different places. So here is, the relationships view kind of shows the data model of our data set. One point of confusion is that some people confuse the term data set and data model. Note that in Power BI Desktop, every project has exactly one data set. And when you publish this data set, what's going to happen is that the data set's going to show up, inside of a particular workspace, and that is a data model. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that when you work with Power BI Desktop, generally you can use data model and data set interchangeably. I'm sure you can find cases where they differ, but not in doing general Power BI Desktop work inside there. Okay, now, in addition to importing tables and making sure we have relationships, we can do things like modify columns. Here's an example where if I go to Data View and we go look at our customers, well, we have a customer. So what we'd like to do, given the fact that we have the customer's birthday, is we'd like to find the customer's age. So here's an example of writing a calculated column. We basically take the user's or the customer's birth date, we subtract it from today's date, and internally dates are stored as integer values. So you get the number of days in between these two, and you can subtract through by 365, and then you basically round down to the nearest significant digit, and that's what gives us the age. Now, once we've created age, you have this set of discrete values, but you probably don't want to show something like a bar chart and show how much people of 25 years old have bought and 26. You want to put things into age groups. So here's another example of creating a calculated column to take every age and put them in a particular bucket. So the idea there is I create a calculated column. Let's go ahead and I want to look at sales revenue. And I'll just basically show this, inside of a table. Let's go ahead and make this a little bit bigger inside here. But with this particular calculated column that we've just created there, age group, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to add age group inside here. And what you're going to see is now, we can basically define demographics. So quite often we create calculated columns to start breaking out the individual records in ways that we want to categorize them. So this is typically known as binning or grouping, in data analysis. Okay, other things that we do, is we create measures. While calculated columns live within a table, a measure is something that's really kind of more project-wide in scope. For instance, here's a very simple measure, sales revenue. And the idea is that when I'm creating different graphics inside here, I want to take a bunch of rows, basically every single row where the customer is 65 and over, and I want to aggregate them into a sum value. So that gives me the ability to be able to do that. Now, maybe, there's more that I want to look at in terms of, units sold. Do I want to look at something, such as the customer count inside here? So let's go ahead and add another measure and another measure inside here. And now we can kind of start seeing how we get the information that we need for a particular project. Now, you can also add dimensional hierarchies. And the idea of a dimensional hierarchy, is you have something like customer, and a customer is in a state, and a state is in a sales region. So we've defined this customer geography hierarchy inside here. Now, let's say that I want to exploit this hierarchy. So let's say that I go ahead and I select the hierarchy, and it creates some type of a chart. I'm going to switch this over, and I'm going to basically have an axis that has the hierarchy inside there, and then we'll look at sales revenue, basically as the value inside. So what's kind of neat about this is that there is a drill down mode. And the idea of drill down mode is if you show the top level of the hierarchy and the user clicks on that, they drill down to the next level inside there. And then they can keep drilling down, in our case, from sales region to U.S. state to U.S. city, all the way down to U.S. zip code. So basically having these hierarchies inside your data model, gets to be very advantageous. Okay, now let's go ahead and take my project. And as the very last thing, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I set, whatever page, that I want to be, the page that's going to show first. I'll make that the active page. We'll hit save. And now we're going to publish this project. So I'll go ahead and we'll choose publish. Now when you publish, you can publish basically to your personal workspace or to any app workspace that you have write permissions to. So let's go ahead and publish this inside there. And once this thing gets published right here, let's give it a couple more seconds to complete. And so now it's completed. Let's go back to the browser, and you can kind of see that every time you publish a Power BI desktop project, you get a data set and you get a report. Now remember that I changed the name to CK Demo. So notice that when you publish with Power BI Desktop, the two different resources, the report and data set you've created, have the exact same name as the PBIX file minus the PBIX extension. Okay. And so the idea is that now that you've done that, let's say that you wanted to refresh that data inside there, you'd be able to go down to settings, and you'd be able to go through and basically configure things like the data sources that you need to connect to, and you'd be able to set up automatic refresh. Okay. Now, next thing I want to do is talk about apps and app workspaces. So app workspaces are required for team-based development. Now, true, it is possible that you could just stay in your personal workspace. You could create dashboards and use something called dashboard sharing to be able to share something with another user. But the more companies and organizations get up to speed on Power BI, the more that the app workspace will become the norm for the place that we create solutions that we want to share with other users. Whether it's just a small team or whether it's, a report that we want to share, to 2,000 users, across the globe. Now, let's go back here. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new app workspace. So I'll go ahead and we'll say create a new app workspace. Now, if you've created group workspaces, you're going to find that they're not much different. So I'm going to go ahead and create this, and I'll just call this CK Demo, just like my project. And when we create a particular workspace, we can also enter email addresses. For instance, for this one right here, I'll add myself. And I'm going to add myself as an admin to this particular workspace inside. Okay, now we'll go ahead and choose OK. So when you create a new workspace, it's empty. There's nothing inside there. So let's go back to Power BI Desktop. And let's choose to publish this one more time. But now we're going to publish it to the new app workspace that I just created. So we'll go ahead. We'll choose OK. And so remember, this is going to give me a data set. In addition to the data set, it's going to give me a report. But Power BI Desktop will never create dashboards. So let's go back here. And I'll do a little bit of a refresh here. And there's the data set. Great. There's the report. Let me open this report and go ahead and pin a couple of these inside there. So I'll create a quick dashboard here just so we have something to demo in the next part right here. Okay, so let's say that's enough. If I look at this particular workspace, I have one data set. If I had unlimited time in this demo, I'd go through the steps of configuring it for automatic refresh, once a day or once every 6 hours. We also have a report, and I'll take a look at the report. Let's say the report looks good, great. I'll also go and we'll take a look at our dashboard. Okay, maybe I'll make a couple changes to the dashboard. I just realized that I have the same thing here twice. So if I go back here to this particular dashboard and we go ahead and remove this and we put this up here, and that's good enough for this point of the demo. So what I wanted to show is that I've now created my app workspace, and note that this is a shared space, so I could have two other report authors that are working with me. We could all be publishing Power BI desktop projects here and collaborating to make sure the reports and dashboards are available to everyone. Now here's the part that's new. We're going to click on Publish App. So I'm going to click on Publish App, and so when I do that, I'll say this is my app inside here. I get to pick a background color. Great. Now as far as content goes, note that you don't really have a choice. So this is different than if you used organizational content packs, where when you created the organizational content pack, you got to pick and choose which dashboards and reports in the current group workspace you wanted to use. Here, everything that you put inside there goes in. The only thing you really get to do is you get to say, when someone goes to my app, I get to report, I get to point to either a report or a dashboard as the entry point. Now, there's also access. Who's going to have access to this? And I can make it individuals or Office 365 groups. I'm going to say entire organization. And we're going to go ahead and choose Finish. And now Publish. Now, I could basically take this URL and I could email it to anyone who could click on that, which would kind of automatically install the app. But now what I want to do is show you the user experience. So the user experience now, let's say that we have a user, and I'm going to put this user back in the user's personal workspace. So one thing to remember, that for you, even to be able to get into an app workspace, you have to have the Power BI Pro license. So let's say you and one other person had Power BI Pro licenses, and you've created this app workspace and you've published the app. So now your company has 1,000 users that all have Power BI licenses that are free. We're not paying. And so this is the model for them to consume. They basically come up here to apps. They don't have any apps yet. Great. Let's go ahead and click on Get Apps. Now, when we do that, what you're going to see is that all the apps we published, hey, there's the CK demo. Let's go ahead and get it now. And the idea is that the contents of your app workspace are then shown to this user in a read-only fashion through the app. So the idea is that they click on the app, and then what are they going to be able to see? They're going to be able to, see the reports and the group workspaces inside there. So now this user can get inside there using the app. Great. Okay. So let's say you've pushed this app out and 1,000 people are using it. And so one thing you think about is, gosh, when someone goes to my app, we've kind of made the start page the report, not the dashboard, and I want the dashboard to look a little bit better. So what I'm going to do now is let's go back into the app workspace, and we're going to make a change and show how we can push that change out. So we'll go back here, and so we'll start with the dashboard. Okay, that looks interesting. Let's go now to that report. Let's find another couple tiles. So here's a tile we'll add inside there. We'll go and take this one as well, and we will add that inside there as well. Let's now go back to my dashboard and make it look a little bit prettier inside here. Let's do that. Let's do that. Okay, great. Let's now, inside of our app, note there is a update app inside there. And so if I go ahead and click on update app, it gives me one more chance to come through here in content. I'm going to go ahead and switch that over to the dashboard. And at this point, the users only see the version 1 release of the app. So now, for the last 2 or 3 days, me and a bunch of other users have made a bunch of stage changes. No one's seeing the changes as we go, But now that we have a bunch of changes and we're confident that we can kind of push version 2 out on top of version 1, simply going to click on Update App. We're going to click on Update. Great. And now that we've done that, let's go see the user experience. So a user who installed the app yesterday now comes back in, clicks on the app, and there's the updated dashboard with the new tiles inside there. They click through there and they get through, to the back end. Okay. So, what I wanted to show in this demo right here is that app workspaces are where all the teamwork is going to be done. Don't be confused, because app workspaces used to be called group workspaces. Sometimes they're called groups. So in typical Microsoft fashion, we have 3 confusing terms that mean the exact same thing. The last point I want to make is that today, when you create an app workspace, Microsoft actually creates a Office 365 group. And what I mean by that is that there is a SharePoint site and a distribution list and lots of heavyweight things behind the app workspace. That reminds me that this is the Office 365 webinar series by Combined Knowledge. So the next session is July 5th, and they're actually covering Office 365 groups, and I'll go and talk about them in depth. But what I want to mention is that for the last 2 years, when you create a group workspace, they create an Office 365 group. Going forward, the Power BI team has said that they are going to make app workspaces lighter in the future. So when you create an app workspace, it will only really provision, the storage for Power BI things like dashboards, reports, and data sets, and they will not create the whole heavyweight Office 365 group. And I think that will be something that changes between now and the end of the year. Okay, so I've showed you how to create group workspaces, and I've showed you one way to push things out. Okay, we're going to end with just a quick discussion. I see there are some questions. I'll make sure I answer all the questions before we end off today. So I see several of you put questions inside there. I will definitely get to those. Last thing we want to talk about is the developer landscape. Now, for developers, the first thing is to understand the built-in visual types and see where the gaps are. For many companies, the built-in visual types will be great. But for other companies, the developer opportunities, are going to be things like programming the Power BI REST API, developing custom visuals, embedding Power BI content in websites. Okay. If you are a developer and you want to get up to speed on the development story, first thing you need to do is to learn a non-developer topic, which is Power BI Desktop. So most of the things in development build on top of Power BI Desktop project files. So don't think, as many developers did in SharePoint, I'm never going to use SharePoint Designer because I'm a real dev. That's not the case with Power BI Desktop. You need to learn it. You need to learn the data modeling and the query tools inside there. By using the Power BI REST API, we can also do things like automatically upload and configure Power BI Desktop PBX files. We can create streaming data sets and create real-time dashboards. And the whole Power BI embedded story, which has recently changed, is something you do with the Power BI REST API as well. If you want to build custom visuals, that is a great territory to get into. The learning curves involved are, you're not using JavaScript, you're using TypeScript. So you have to move from JavaScript to TypeScript. You're going to program with libraries like D3. And the other big thing for developers is kind of moving outside of Visual Studio and starting to work with Node.js, the Node Package Manager, and an editor such as Visual Studio Code. But the promise that if you can't get exactly what you want out of the box, you can create your own customized visual, gets to be, one of the more powerful aspects of the platform. Okay, the final thing I want to point out before we break is what's happened to Power BI Embedded. So the idea of Power BI Embedded is that we want to not serve up Power BI reports through the Power BI service, but I want to embed Power BI reports and dashboards in a custom application. And the users of that custom application probably aren't going to have Office 365 user accounts or Power BI licenses. Now, there was a first version of Power BI Embedded that was built in Azure. And many of us learned that, and then they told us it was a big joke, we've got something else planned. So there are, there's a new version of Power BI Embedded that you don't have to do anything in Azure. You're going to basically be able to work just within the Power BI service. But anything you see about Power BI Embedded, that's more than 2 months old is obsolete information. And the whole idea is that they're sunsetting the old framework. And so now for Power BI Embedding, V2, the way we're supposed to do it, is that we'll start a project by creating a Power BI desktop project that has a data set and report. And the idea is the developer kind of takes that as a black box. We upload the PBIX file to an app workspace. Now, in the previous version of Power BI Embedded, when we used Azure, you couldn't use Power BI Desktop, so it was much harder. So in the new story of Power BI Embedded, we just use the same app workspace that I just showed you. And the idea is you upload PBIX files, which you can do with Power BI Desktop, with the browser, with PowerShell, with the REST API. And then you're going to develop apps on top of that that basically are able to take the reports and the dashboards and embed them in a custom application. Okay, so I didn't get very far into it. I just wanted to kind of throw out what the developer landscape is, and if you're going to use Power BI Embedded, to take note of the big changes and to learn the new way, not the old way. Now, I want to finish off quickly just by pointing out that my company, Critical Path Training, works with Combined Knowledge. So we're over there this fall. I'm going to do 2 different classes. One is the Power BI Bootcamp, which is 4 days. So this is for, I'd say SQL database folks, for IT folks that really want to master the Power BI environment. But we focus on really getting good at Power BI desktop skills and being able to publish reports and being able to work with apps and app workspaces. The second week, we have a developer course where we're using Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code, and we're writing a lot of code in languages like TypeScript and M and R and C#. Okay, so with that, I now have a couple different questions inside there. So first question is, where can we get the recording after this session? So what I'm going to do, I'm recording this session, and when it's over today, I'm going to take the file and send it to the Combined Knowledge folks, and I think they have a common place where they're posting the recordings, for everything in their webinar series. So I would look to the Combined Knowledge folks, to basically figure out where that is. Okay. Second question, was this recorded? Yes, absolutely. Okay, here's another question. When you create a new workspace and publish the report to it, if a report is published to multiple workspaces, does it duplicate the data set? And the answer to that in most cases is no, because if you publish to 2 different places, each workspace will get its own data set. So you're actually duplicating the data set, so you're not really going kind of across workspace boundaries. When you get into more complicated scenarios, and today we have to write code to do that, it's possible to clone a report from a data set in another workspace. But everything you do through the user interface, everything in your solution is going to be self-contained in a single workspace. Okay. So will this video be put on the CK YouTube site? The video will be put. This is not a question. This is our friend Rob Pratt making a declarative statement. Thank you, Rob, very much. So at this point, we're at time. I really appreciate everyone taking the time to listen to me talking about Power BI. I think it's a great platform. I think data analytics over the next 5 years will be like SharePoint was in 2007, a great on-ramp, a great place for people to ramp up and really get great skills that give them great job security, and a lot of power in the workforce. So with that, Ted Patterson from Critical Path Training, thank you to Combined Knowledge for letting me present this event, and I hope to see you all soon. Please come to our classes in the fall if you can. Cheers.